My name is Gavin Cleesebees. I am the Director of Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Partnerships for the Massachusetts Historical Society. And we're joining today to talk about the film, The Last of the Winthrops. I hope you all enjoyed watching the film and are ready with some great questions for our guests. Today we are joined by Viviane Winthrop, who is the director, writer, and executive producer and star of the film. Although her father was a professional actor and her mother a piano teacher, she chose a career in dentistry. After 25 years as a dentist, she has recently retired to pursue her dream as a film director. The Last of the Winthrops is her directorial debut. As I'm sure many of you know, the Massachusetts Historical Society hosts a variety of public programs, seminars, and teacher workshops throughout the course of the year. We offer many of these programs for free or at a very moderate cost, but are only able to do this thanks to the support of our members and donors. If you enjoy our programs, such as the program this evening, we hope you will consider becoming a member of MHS or supporting our work through donations. Viviane, do you want to start us off just by telling us a little bit about the film and how you got started making it, and we can dive into some of our questions.
Sure. First of all, I want to thank you so much for having me here, and so glad to meet everyone that's on the Zoom today. The Last of the Winthrops really came about years before. I inherited the journals from the lady that raised my dad. Her name was Taunt Vicky to me, and she had she barely missed a day of World War II, and they were in the south of France. And my dad's in her journals, my dad's mother. So it was, when I first inherited the journals, I was 21 years old. And unfortunately, I didn't take them seriously. I just sort of browsed through them and saw a lot about the weather, not really understanding the gravity of amazing information that was in there. So finally, when I was in my late 40s, I decided I grew up and I thought, okay, I have some opportunity now to really explore, my dad growing up in the Winthrop history and, everything that was really near and dear to him, as well as the trauma of the war and the things that he went through, and to, just to try to understand, him, but also to, appreciate what they went through during that period of history.
Can you speak a little bit about your process of planning for this film? When did you decide to make it? And could you describe what your original intentions were when you started working on the film? Because I think, as those of us who've watched the whole thing know, it may take a little bit of a turn towards the end.
Yes, and so there was going to be some disclosures, though. The film, so in 2017, I'm just going to jump right in. I'd already started transcribing the Taunt Vicky journals. I was really interested in starting to find the history, but I didn't realize that I was going to have a very big turn of events in my life. So, and for those who have not watched the film, I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and just say what happened now. So the midway through about midway through the film, you'll find out that I have an alternate parentage. So I grew up till I was 49 years old, an only child, and I thought I was Viviane Winthrop. And I still am Viviane Winthrop, I just have more. So the reason I started the film was the story is so crazy how it happened. I talked to what turns out to be my new third cousin. And I said, well, I really just want to write a book about this whole thing. So I never had planned to make a movie. And so he introduced me to his cousin. And he said, well, you have to, and his name is Adam Winthrop, and he's the co-director on this film. And he said, well, you can't just write a book. Your life is happening right now. What are you talking about? You have to jump right in, make a movie. And I'm like, but I've never made a movie before. My dad was an actor, a Shakespearean actor. He loved the stage, but, and he'd made a few, he'd made a movie and he'd made television, but that was so far beyond anything I had ever thought I would ever do. So, but I jumped right in and made a documentary film with blinders on, And I'm finding out now, as it's finally finished and out in the world, that there's still a lot to making a film.
Well, it really is a beautiful film, and I have to, congratulate everyone who worked on it. It's a really amazingly well done film. I think that if I made a film, it would not look anything like that. I think a lot more difficult cutting and pasting. So there was technically just a really fabulous job putting it together. So your whole team, I think, was really great about that. When you headed off on your genealogical trip to Europe, what were you hoping to find on your journey? What were you hoping to understand about visiting the places where your father had grown up?
I wanted to, my dad, his sadness was really what I grew up with. And I wanted to be able to see things that he saw and to understand, the losses that he experienced. But I also wanted to bring to life the stories he would tell me. And I wanted to really understand that part of myself. It was my foundation, and it was something that I had to explore because that was the one thing I knew to be real. So.
I've grown up and lived in Massachusetts for most of my life. So the Winthrops are a very present place or a force in Massachusetts. I grew up in Cambridge, and there's Winthrop Park right in the middle of Harvard Square. This is actually sort of a funny sort of side note, but Winthrop Park was the site of John Winthrop's home when Cambridge was supposed to be the capital of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. But John Winthrop decided that Cambridge was a preposterous place to have the capital because it was selected to be the capital because it was more easily defended, but you really couldn't get an ocean-going ship up the river, so it was not a reasonable place for a capital. So he struck his house down, took his house apart, and moved it back to Boston and reassembled it in Boston. And because of that, what was perceived as this huge insult to Cambridge, nothing has ever been built on that land. So it's like salted earth. There can never be anything built on that until John Winthrop comes back and rebuilds his house, which seems relatively unlikely. But anyways, the Winthrops are sort of a large presence in Massachusetts. But I imagine that it's much less so in Arizona. How much of the Winthrop family story did you know growing up? And how did your journey change your opinion about your family history? And was this for the better or for the worse?
Well, I guess what I'm going to do, I put in the chat out of lack of a better place to put it, but I'm putting in the genealogy. So if you look in the chat, you'll be able to see sort of where my dad's history came from. So I put that up there. So to answer the question, wow, that's a really insightful question. When I decided, every historical family has the good and bad. It has the highlights and it has the lowlights. But I wanted to focus more on what I learned growing up with my dad and the stories that he would tell me. And for him, the Winthrops were he felt very much a part of them, but he also didn't want to live the life that he didn't want to be an attorney. He didn't want to be a politician. He didn't want, that's not the life that he wanted. He wanted to be able to tell stories. And one of the things that I appreciated about my dad that I didn't before was that it took a lot of courage for him to live his bliss. And he became an actor, and he went against sort of the historical family, the expectations that were placed on him. He didn't want to do that. So I thought, how amazing the strength. I didn't realize how much strength he had. So that was one of the first things I learned about him. But I also learned about the Winthrop family, how they had to really stick together when we were in Poe. So as we were in Europe, we're finding these things out from the Ancestry genealogy, the pro-genealogy group. And we found out these stories just as they were happening. So I didn't know about, Louise Van Zandt and Nielsen Winthrop, who, were married and had children. And she had she eloped. Well, she didn't elope, I take it back. She went away with the Count And it turns out they went away for about a year, and then they came back. So I really want to explore, that story one of these days in more depth than what I was able to learn when I was there. So the other thing, so that basically brings me to the fact that everybody is human, that you have a famous last name. Or for myself, I was, for the longest time, I was my title. So Dr. Winthrop, I was the money I made. I was everything, but, I didn't expect to have a life-changing difference in my identity. So as far as I don't know if I answered your question well enough, but, one of the things that I did find out is that it was in Europe. In Arizona, nobody really, Winthrop, whatever, nobody said anything. So I never felt like the Winthrop name had any fairy tale except hard work. That's really all I've ever associated with being, Viviane Winthrop, is that my mom used to say, raise up your sleeves, get to work. You can't, there's no money. You got to just go do your life, and, don't expect to be taken care of, just get to work. So that's what the Winthrops have always meant to me. And I wanted to do so much more with my life, so I'm in the progress of trying to do something with my life.
So this sort of touches a little bit on what you were just talking about, but can you reflect a little bit on what it's like having a famous last name? Obviously, Gavin Cleeseby's, I do not have a famous last name. I have a very hard to pronounce last name. But can you discuss the hidden costs of having a famous name, or the benefits? And I think that's also interesting that your father, when he was performing as an actor, performed with a stage name. So he did not use Winthrop as his stage name. So clearly he was also thinking about this to some degree. And again, of course, this may be different in Massachusetts versus Arizona, but still, it's I think you never once had a textbook that your last name didn't appear in, or at least an American history textbook, biology maybe.
It's he changed he used the stage name of his mother, Dauphin, which was his mother's, I don't know, there's a general back there, and so they had, there's a certain prestige to that. But when he went to Montreal, people couldn't pronounce Winthrop very well, and they really didn't understand what the Winthrop history was about. So they could more easily understand Dauphin, Roger Dauphin. And so he didn't have a British accent. He had a very international accent. So when you hear his voice on the tapes, he's got this big booming voice, but I still wish he had gone to Hollywood. He would have been amazing. But in France or in Canada, so he didn't really have a French Canadian accent either. So he was kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. He really couldn't find his niche, but he had the most amazing voice. So, we all sort of struggle, but the biggest reason that he went to Canada is that after he went to the Academy of Dramatic Art in England, the British school there, the consulate basically denied his work visa and said at the time that that visa needed to be for the British people, and he had to give up this job that he was given. And so he was very, very, very disappointed, and really affected his life throughout. And so imagine, he is an aristocrat. He was born to lead this life, and he couldn't lead the life that he wanted. So what I learned from him is, I can't just sit on the sidelines, and if I get pushed down, or if, this thing of finding out that I have, a biological father, that's not my dad. And I didn't want to live the life that he had. So in a sense, what I learned from Reginald Winthrop was, and I thought, well, maybe even John Winthrop and his father, Adam Winthrop, if you're knocked down, stand back up. So I think that's the other thing I learned, because in Arizona, there's no, there was no Winthrop name, but I sure felt like a princess in Poe.
The recordings that your dad made were really great throughout the film. Were those made just as essentially like audio letters to you, or what's the context of that?
He called them journal parlé. So in English, it would be like a talking journal. So, and at the time, it was just the tape recorder. So it was, and same thing, I was so young and I just was so busy, like, oh, I got to make it through dental school. And, I should have just responded in kind, and gave him what he was trying to do. I feel like such a dumb kid at the time. So
We were all 18 at some point. There's a reason that there's a difference between 18-year-olds. So in much of the film, I was wondering, could you explain a little bit about your immediate family's life? How did your parents meet? And you sort of mentioned a little bit about how your dad ended up in Montreal, but then moving to Arizona. And I was also curious, your mother had family in Montreal or near Montreal. Did they remain a part of your life once you were in Arizona, or?
Yes, thankfully. So I have a lot of my cousine and cousins, and they're still in Montreal, and some closer to Quebec City, but most of them are in Montreal. And so I guess the way my parents met, my mom is 12 years younger than my dad. I talk about them in the current text because they're still very much alive in my heart. But so 12 years difference. My mom was working at the bank. She was also a pianist. She was studying with one of the prestigious ladies in Montreal. But she worked at the bank, and they had this party with all these musicians because my mom was very much into the music scene, and my father was there. And so they met, and I think it was just instant, un coup de foudre. How do you say that? Like a lightning. And so they got married pretty soon after they met, about 9 months. They got married in 1963. And then in 1968, I appeared, and I kept asking my mom, why did you guys wait so long to have kids? So my mom, never said anything to me. So you can imagine if you find out, you're one thing, and then you find out you have this alternative life. It's quite intense, but they made their lives in Montreal, and then we moved to a little place called Bécomo, that was on the St. Lawrence River, which was hell for my dad. But he did it for my mom, and then he just couldn't handle it anymore, and he was really getting more and more sick. I don't know if when you watch the movie, you'll find out that my dad was gassed, and that affected him for much of his life. He had myelodysplastic anemia, and so he died of that, and also emphysema from too much smoking, which is the other reason I don't smoke. But they had quite the interesting life. And my dad, we were actually looking for houses in different places. We went to Montreal and Ottawa, and we stood in line for an apartment. And my dad said, "No, we're moving to Sedona." And mom and I were like, "What?" So, because it reminded him of this one place in the south of France where he lived in Giron-les-Pins. And I saw that place, and there's cactus there. And I wish I could have put that in the film. It was so funny, but unfortunately the filming part didn't come out. That part didn't come out.
That must have been a massive transition, though. I mean, not only is it a different city, it's a different country, different language. And you were 13 at the time, is that right?
14 and a half, yeah. I was 3 days late for school, and so I'm just, like everybody's staring at me.
Yeah, that must have been tricky. But so we have a question from an audience member named Mary, who said, when you first got the ancestry results, it must have looked like a real outlier. I would have thought the data was wrong, like the test tube mixed up. But then it sounded like when your new sister reached out, that began the real understanding. How far apart were those things, and what what was that period like?
Mary, that's an awesome question. Thank you so much. When I first received my DNA results, and I'm generally pretty private until now, but I decided to leave it open to see if there's, some kind of Winthrop cousins. And at the time, it actually said I was half French and half British. Okay, now that was when Ancestry first started. So I didn't think twice about it. There was nothing to indicate. And I think I was 1% Jewish. I was 3% from the Caucasus. I'm like, okay, well, that could have been mom's side, something, or, can't be my dad, but, so I didn't, and my mom didn't want to do an ancestry test at the time. So, okay. And so it was years and years later, that's when my sister, my now sister, contacted me. And then I went on to Ancestry, and they had, luckily I have the information, but to show like, okay, half British, half French, which is crazy because now I am half Italian and half French, with a 10% of various things, the 10%, like 1% Jewish. I'd have to pull it up again. Oh, I should have done that for this. Okay. But what really, and she told me she was born in Morocco. So I didn't understand, well, how could she be born in Morocco and I'm half Italian? And so it turns out that the Perez family were originally from Italy, and parts of it said the Vatican, which I thought was kind of weird. And also, oh gosh, I'm gonna have to look. I haven't looked at that for a while. So the only thing I did find out is, I guess, that from Italy, they went to Spain, and then from Spain, they went to Morocco. And then my biological father then emigrated from Morocco to Montreal. So I don't know, Mary, if you have more, I can answer as much as I can.
And I just want to let all the audience members know that they're welcome to put questions into the chat, and they can send it to Olivia or to me. Or as we get a little bit further on, we can also have people raise their hands, and they can ask their question using their voice. One question I was sort of curious about, you mentioned already that your father was very sort of aware and conscious of his role as a Winthrop. How many connections did you have to other members of the Winthrop family? Like, were you in contact with extended family members or not?
So my dad's family was very, very small. And so he had his cousin, whose name is Henry Durand. And so Henry and Bertie, and also Robert. I didn't know Robert, but I knew Henry, my dad's cousin, and I knew Bertie, my other dad's cousin, from so in the film, it's André. So, okay, sorry, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So the Dauphin sisters, there are three sisters. There is Simone Dauphin, which is my grandmother. And then André Dauphin was her sister. And then there was, oh my gosh. So André is Bertie and Henry's. So the cousins are on his mother's side, my dad's mother's side. Okay, clear as mud. So that's the only family that I really know. And then my dad's cousin Henry has a daughter named Florence, and Florence is a physician. She practiced mostly in Germany, and luckily, and she winters here in Florida. So I get to speak with her, but so it's really just my dad's mother's family that I knew. But I have not met, there was no other Winthrops because my dad was an only child. And then Gerald and Harold were Nielsen Winthrop's twins. And then there was all that, as you see in the movie, there was the scandal in Poe. So So yeah, as far as Winthrops, my dad's, and that's why he kept saying to me, well, you're the last of the Winthrops and he used to say it was the Boston branch of the Winthrops, but genealogically, because you can see in so Stuyvesant, she married one of the Winthrops and she's from New York. So the genealogist said, well, you really are both, I guess the Winthrop branches, both New York and Boston. So I don't know. But that's why I named the film The Last of the Winthrops, because my dad used to tell me that, and the pressure of trying to accomplish something that was Winthrop-y was definitely there my whole life.
After you made the film, have you been contacted by other members of your extended family?
No, so I know there's extended family you're talking about from.
Yeah, just larger, like Winthrops from across the country, across the world.
No, unfortunately, and I haven't reached out to them. I, just been sort of living my life kind of in a small sort of way. And now, having the chance to reach out, but there's so many Winthrops from the other branches of the Winthrop family. One day it'd be amazing to meet them, like Tom Selleck.
When you went on a journey to understand your father and your relationship to your name, while on this journey, obviously you found out about having a different biological father. How did this change your understanding of your father's life? Like, how did it change? So your father in the Winthrop side, but I'm going to continue to refer to as your father as opposed to biological father. But how did that sort of change how you thought about what you understood about his life? Did this and did learning about this like bring any closure to you, or did it just open more questions?
Wow. So originally I was going to write the book and find out more and really delve into the whole thing instead of just jumping right in and making a documentary film. So now I am starting the book, and I'm actually starting with the Tom Vicky journals, seeing my dad when he was young, and seeing what the Winthrop, even then, as a, he still had, the Winthrop still had this influence on him. But my dad struggled with a lot of things, especially abandonment. His mother sent him off to boarding school because that's what you do when you're a Winthrop, you just go off to boarding school. And I never, all these things I didn't appreciate about my dad. I realized when I found out that he ended up raising me so unselfishly, I should say. So, he'd always wanted, a family, and but okay. And sorry, Dad, but I'm just going to disclose. So my dad struggled with alcohol, and he had major headaches. And so he struggled with opioid addiction. And so it was really hard to understand what it was to, I really didn't understand his life. And so I think I judged him for that. And then to realize that he raised me and didn't say anything. I mean, that's like, you raise somebody, that's 365 days. That's like 24 hours a day. You're, doing diapers, you're handling trauma, you're handling, okay, I'm not going to cry. But one day he said to me when he was starting to die, so I said, hey, Daddy, I love you. He goes, well, you better. And I never understood what that meant. And now I do. It's like, you're right. I'd better. So to me, he's like, wow, he's this hero. I wish I could tell him that he's amazing.
Well, I mean, it's great that in some ways it seems like it made you appreciate him more, and I think that's great. One question I had is, like, you heard these stories from your father growing up. When you got to Europe, how did the stories, did it ring true? Were you surprised by what you saw, or was it what you expected from the stories that you had heard?
Really being in Poe is really what illuminated the whole Winthrop and the Van Zants. And we're in this beautiful stable. They're the Winthrops he's the master of the Poe hunt. I mean, all of a sudden it's like, he assumed the responsibility, and a lot of the Winthrops were around, other very prestigious families. And so Anderson Cooper's family was right there with my family, and so that's when I kind of realized that, wow, this is a big deal, that I just, yeah, dad, yeah, first governor of Massachusetts, and yeah, governor of Connecticut. Yeah, had never felt that, I think my mom had made it that, you have to work hard, you have to live up to these things, but, like, you don't want to be, you have to make your step in the world. But being in Poe, I was like, wow, these people are pretty awesome. So.
So there's two comments in the chat. One is from Peter, who is an MHS staff member, and he said that at least 18 Winthrops have been members of the Massachusetts Historical Society, including a founder and past president. As an MHS staff member, I've been surprised by how ambivalent at least some modern day descendants are about their Winthrop ancestors. So you may have some interesting conversations ahead of you.
Malone is of the Winthrop branch, of a different Winthrop branch, but he's still a Winthrop. So, and so that's wow.
And Rose, who is a regular attendee of programs of ours, said that the members of the Winthrop Society will be very interested in your story.
I will reach out to, you said Brenda, right? And so I have so many, there's pictures, and, I have the Winthrop Bible. There's just so many documents and pictures. And also when they were in the United States, there's very famous people hanging out with them. So I'd love to be able to give that to the society.
Great. So one question, let me see. One question I had was, how did making this film change your relationship with your mother? I mean, obviously you moved, I wasn't actually quite sure where you were living prior to moving back to Arizona, but you moved back to Arizona. So you're much closer to your mother. But then you also took on this project, which obviously went in a direction that was unanticipated, uncovered some skeletons.
Yes. And part of what I want to do with writing is really exploring, kind of what my mom went through. I was so shocked when I found out. I just went through the gamut of emotions, from like, well, how could you not tell me? How could this be a secret? But now I understand her so much more. She grew up in this small town. Her mother's a mayor. He's the veterinarian of the area. And so she has a certain standing in the society. But my dad would go and he'd binge drink, and he'd leave her for 3 days at a time. And God, if I had to go through that, I mean, my mom stayed with him. And there's a section in the film where Irene, who's actually Tom Vicky's niece, but she was also dating my dad before my mom. And, she's saying, a lot of people wouldn't stay and stay with that, but they loved each other. And, she was very much Catholic, and he was Church of England. And so they made it work. But I'm sorry, I lost the train of thought.
That's okay. Just sort of how the process changed your relationship with your mom.
Yeah. So having the opportunity to talk with my mom, and she really didn't want to talk about it. She didn't want me to share the information with Bertie when I was there. So it wasn't until the end of the movie where, we're on Zoom and it's the pandemic, and, she just told him, and he, stuff happened. We just don't have to tell everybody. So now the world knows, but yeah, so it changed. Actually, I would say I had to learn that it wasn't just about me. I had to learn and understand where she came from, and how shame and, you know, clouded her vision of me in a sense. And so like 10 days before she died is when all the walls really just came down, and you know, so those are the most amazing memories and the most hard things to go through, but it makes me really appreciate what my mom did for me now. So
Quite a journey. So Jill commented, and she said, ironic that people talked about the inevitability of what's embedded in one's genes, and it turns out that your genes weren't those Winthrop genes after all. Also, your dad sweetly said, wishing you luck on starting dental school, said you'll be fine with your mother's good looks and your father's brains, when he knew otherwise. But this shows how much he owned his fatherhood, how he embraced his role. It's also clear that he loved you unconditionally. So I think that was a very sweet comment from Jill.
thank you, Jill. Thank you so much.
You part of the way through this film, all of a sudden have a new family, which was large and very vivacious, it seems. Are you still in contact with the Perez family?
Oh yeah. So what's amazing is that she's my half sister, but she has never called me her half sister. I'm like her sister, and my other sister, I'm her sister, and my brothers. And so yeah, I'm really fortunate. I have so much family, and yeah, we talk routinely, at least a couple times a week.
It seems like it's a large family too. So how many like siblings do you have?
So with myself included, there are 9. But unfortunately, Stephanie, she passed away when she was 4. And so Sean, who is not in the film, unfortunately, but I talk to him on a routine basis. And he's not doing well. He's got cancer, but at least so there's 9, so that's then 8, and then there's 1, and then so I have Lillian and Monique, so, and then Jacques and Danny and Andrew, and then Sean. So it's quite the family. Now there is 1 out there that's missing.
Huh.
So when my biological father, so he when his first marriage, he had Jacques and Lillian and Monique, and then there was me outside of the marriage, and then there was then they divorced after that, I guess, and then he remarried with Annie, but she's the one that passed away along with my sister Stephanie. But in between myself and his marriage to Annie, there is another girl out there, another sister out there. So anyway, maybe we'll be able to find her, and that would be interesting. So who knows? There might be another movie. There might be something more to explore.
Wow. Can you tell us a little bit, have you found out more about your biological father? I mean, he was an illusionist. That's not the most common title. Sounds sort of like quite and he certainly seemed like he was a gregarious fellow. Have you learned more about him?
Not much. And the reason I think that, so my father and he were friends, and I think that so my dad was doing he was the MC for Expo 67, and he introduced my biological father's act. But because my father was just struggling with alcohol so much, and my mom was so miserable and so unhappy with life, that from hearing all the stories that my brothers and sisters are telling me, he was kind of like the sunshine. And when he would come into a room, there's nobody that would be left unattended. And so I think my mom just had the sunshine, and she probably, I would imagine, felt hopeful that and warmth that she wasn't receiving in her marriage at the time. And it had been years where, my dad was just, he was just, not well on many levels, and he wasn't living the life he wanted. And I think that added to his depression and everything else he was going through. So anyway, so they did know each other. And apparently the one story I have heard is that my biological father's mother, Mémé Marie. So apparently my dad would go when my mom left him for a good year and a half, I think. But he would go to Mémé Marie, which is my biological grandmother, and she would feed him. So, and so it's just, life is just not always a straight line.
That's good to remember. I mean, so like how your biological father and your father obviously knew each other through being part of the performing arts, but they seem like they would probably be in other ways from very, very different social positions. But they had, I mean, if your father was going to your biological father's mother for food, there must have been some kind of a camaraderie or friendship. I mean, were they
had and so in Montreal, so before my dad moved to Canada, he was in New York for a number of years, nearly 10, a little over 10 years. And so he would go to Harlem and listen to Louis Armstrong. Like, he was there talking to Louis Armstrong. Okay. That just still blows my mind to this day. But he didn't really have, his mom, stayed in New York. And so when he came to Montreal, he didn't really have much family, and his work family became his family. And then, and understanding my new biological family, they're very warm. They're very gregarious. They're, they're Moroccan Jewish people. And I mean, if you told me I was half Chinese, I would have totally understood it, because I love martial arts. I love, the culture, but I never really studied or understood anything about Jewish history. So it was even more of a shock to, like, what's this and what's that? And my new family has been very, very amazing and they're patient with me so that I can understand them. So I figure after I write the Winthrop book, and I think I really needed to, and the reason I needed to finish this journey and still work on the book is to really understand that part of myself, so that I can decide which pieces I want to keep, what's really me, and what I can do to honor the people that raised me, my dad who raised me, who has this historical family. So I thank my ancestors, my dad's ancestors, for courage. John Winthrop went across, the pond, but, it took a lot to lead people and to make a change, and I want to honor that. I want to feel like, and I don't think politics is for me, but I want to do it in my own, particular way.
It's interesting that you mentioned that your mother's mother was the mayor of her town.
Mother's
Mother's father. Okay. But so you have politicians on both sides.
Yes. And I nearly became an attorney, but I said, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm going to be a dentist.
Oh, that's very important too. I think most people have very positive feelings toward their dentist, and not so much to lawyers. So, Jan typed a question to the chat that said, I was also adopted, but my parents told me that when I was 5 years old, so it was just a natural part of my life. Do you think this type of approach would have felt better or worse for you? I think that's obviously a different question, because you were your mother's biological daughter. So it's a little bit of a different scenario. But if your family had told you about this when you were young, how would it have changed your life?
Oh, I think it would have made such a huge difference. Jan, I'm so glad that you were able to be told, and it sounds like you had a supportive family, and I don't know if I'm, overreaching for that, but it's, having your family story growing up really helps to put yourself in this basis, and you're loved, they adopted you, you know and so for me, I had to find out sort of after the fact that my dad didn't officially adopt me. I sort of was just introduced. And so it was a hard thing to fathom, and I'm still working through a lot of that, but I would have definitely appreciated to have the story, so you don't wake up feeling like you're in a cult, like what's real, what is not real. Oh my God, oh yeah, communication, please, everybody, communication. Yeah. And plus, I think it would have helped my mom and dad have a better relationship, because, she's trying to, you have alcoholism, you have sort of opioid addiction, and then the dysfunctional truth. And imagine, like now I can understand, imagine my mom, she had to look at me every day and be reminded that I'm not, what she thought her life was going to be. So I have a lot more compassion now and a lot more understanding. And I think of it for my dad too. He chose to raise me, and that says how much they loved each other too. Like I don't know that I could be so quiet. No, I couldn't be quiet. I would tell my child. So I really hope, yes. So I think definitely knowing would have been so much better.
Yeah. Just in terms of like having watched the movie and being a little unclear about part of the chronology, you mentioned that your mother at some point moved away from your father. And my understanding was that coincided with her relationship, and I'm sorry, I'm forgetting his first name, but Mr. Perez. When did your mother move back in with your father?
So she moved in with her parents. And there's pictures of me. I'm 1 year old and I'm celebrating my birthday. And I think it was probably a few months after that where I guess my grandfather told my dad, she'll go back with you if you stop drinking. And he ended up, he stopped drinking for a while, and but enough so that she went back to him. And it wasn't until I was about 8 that there was some kind of miraculous thing that happened and he stopped drinking. Yeah. So I'm going to say that was based on God, but that's what I name it. But yeah, so miracles happen, and so he was able to do a lot better after that.
Oh, great. And so when you guys moved to Arizona, then he wasn't drinking in Arizona.
No. But he had such headaches from when he was in New York. He had gotten into a fight. He was walking through Central Park to go through to Harlem. And, I've never looked at the map to see where Harlem and Central Park was, but apparently he went through some park, and I'm assuming it's Central Park. But he was accosted by like 4 or 5 people, and they had these knuckle dusters on their hands, and he was hit right here, and he always had a blue mark, but he, suffered from terrible headaches. And at the time, nobody, I don't think there was an MRI back then, but they, gave him some pain meds, and unfortunately, he had pain and needed the pain meds. And so it was, part of the tough parts of what he had to go through.
Okay. So we have a question here. There's actually no name, it just says GMG, but it says, my wife, Mary Lou, would like to ask if you had any contact with your father's mother, Simone, and if your father ever spoke about her.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that question. So yes, so my grandmother, Simone, she passed away when I was 6. And so I do remember spending time with her, and Tante Vicky was her, they say in French, dame de compagnie, but I'm not sure how you say, but it was, they ended up just staying together after the war, and they just were each other's support system. And so when we went to see Tante Vicky, we saw Simone, also. And there is an interesting sort of story I can share about wealth and social status, which also kind of affected how I see people. So I think that probably why I like healthcare, because everybody's sort of on an even footing. But my dad had told me that, Simone, because in the movie you'll see the Simon's sister has this book, and you can see Prince Radziwill is there, and Simone in the journals, she meets with him. They were friends, so she's hanging out with the prince, so and so she was very much invited to all the big parties, but the money, she just didn't have the money anymore. The Winthrop money just fell to the wayside, I guess, as living occurred. And so she couldn't entertain to the level that was necessary to maintain those relationships. And so my dad had, told me those stories. And so it always kind of shocked me, like, oh, I guess you have to have money to have a certain social status. I'm like 5 and 6 years old. So.
Well, we have about a few minutes left. So I'd just like to encourage anyone in the audience who has a question to share them. And people are also welcome to raise their hands or use whatever the right function is. Look, it's the raise hand button. So if anyone would like to raise their hands, they're welcome to, or they can type questions into the chat. And so while we're waiting to see if somebody has another question, can you sort of talk a little bit about how World War II affected your father's family? Did they lose a substantial amount of their wealth during the war? Was that sort of like a turning point in terms of their assets?
Mm-hmm. Yes. My dad used to say that I guess the German generals had come into their house and taken money of the paintings that were there, and there was some amazing artwork that they had at the time. So, and also in the Tom Vicky journals, before the war really set in, they had to sell much of, several paintings. So there was a broker of some sort, and many of the paintings there were sold for them to survive.
And just in terms of me understanding the chronology of this, when your father had passed away before you started making the film, how long before you started making the film had he passed away?
Oh gosh, my dad died in 2003.
Oh, okay, so quite some time.
Yeah, quite some time. Okay. It's going to be 20 years this year.
Okay. So here's a good question. Gina asked, where can you see the movie streamed?
Thank you.
A good chance to plug.
So you can find it on iTunes or Amazon Prime. It's also it's on Vudu, Roku, several other on demand, but mostly it's probably the easiest. If you want to see it in 4K, you can see it, and with the sound. And so I want to plug, my gosh, our composer. There was this amazing review, and I was supposed to put it up on here, but our composer is amazing. His name is Shai Rozov. And so anyway, we were on the Academy list. We didn't make the short list, but we did, get up to that, point before they picked the short list for both the documentary film and for the composer's original score. So yeah, you can see it on iTunes, and Amazon Prime is probably the easiest place to see it. And thank you so much. And it's I used my own money to make this film, and yes, I went over budget because I didn't know how to make a movie, but I can say that it was really worth it for my mental health. So.
Well, it seemed like you had a really great team of people that you worked with. Is there anyone of them that you'd like to highlight, just in terms of how great they were?
So Doug Blush, who has his films, he does many of the documentary films, but you can see his film is The Elephant Whisperers. That one's been shortlisted on the Academy Awards, and he did 20 Feet from Stardom. He also did, oh my gosh, he's gonna kill me. Many films, and so he's one of the amazing people that are on the team. and Adam Singer, who's the producer and the co-director, he's the one that brought everybody together. So he's the one that introduced our editor, and his name is Sergio Miranda. And Sergio went into my mind because I didn't have the words to express a lot of these feelings at the time. And so he would just talk to me until like stuff would come out. Okay, this is what I want to say. So incredible people. Eduardo Cervello, our cinematographer, and Ash Sutton, our sound guy. And then we had Skywalker, who did our sound. Oh my gosh, they're so incredible. And DXD, who did our color. And then we had Christopher Seward. Christopher Seward is the storyline editor, and he did Fahrenheit 9/11. He did a recent one about unions. He did Sicko, and so he really helped to put, since I didn't have a book, and we just went and filmed, and then we had life happen. He helped to put all this together. So, and I know I'm missing countless people, our graphic artist. So we have Alan De La Rosa, we have Alexi Terhoff. We have just so many people that have come into my life, and they're like family. And so it's been a blessing.
Well, Catherine said, oops, it just disappeared. Congratulations on what seems to be a great new and old family. And speaking of art, the painting behind you is amazing. So, which actually you do see in the film. So, there was also sort of a question that to paraphrase, which maybe is a good question to wrap up on, but said, what did you think your father wanted the Winthrop legacy to be? Like, what did he understand the Winthrop legacy, and what did he want that to mean for you?
Wow. Okay, that one took me. He always said, just, do the best you can. And I think that he would want the Winthrop legacy to continue. And even though at some point, I'm an old person now, I'm like 54. And so maybe one day I'll get married. I wanted 12 kids. That's not going to happen. So who knows? I don't know what's ahead, but I do want to give justice to everybody that's had a part in raising me. And the Winthrops have had a big part in raising me. And also the Perez and the Tétros and, all the people that have come for this film. So I think the legacy is, communication. I think and connection. He would want connection to go forward. And he would want, if I can make a little bit of a better place in the world, he would want me to do that.
Yeah, well, I want to thank you very much for sharing your story and making a wonderful film and taking time to talk to us about this. And I want to thank all the people who joined us, and I hope everyone has a great evening, whether they're actually in Arizona where it's not evening yet, or in Massachusetts where it's very definitely evening.
Really appreciate everybody coming for this, this talk together. So grateful.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.